So the question I just really want to understand better is separate from just the polling, like, and this is what you're kind of getting at, like, why is there not, like, because like, let me put it this way, and maybe you guys are going to push back on me when I say this, but I actually think if the people of West Virginia actually deeply in the streets wanted Medicare for all, then Joe Manchin would support it. Because yes, Joe Manchin, you could say he's corrupt, you could say he cares about donations, he cares about power. He wants to get reelected. That is all Joe Manchin cares. Joe Manchin would much rather be in the Senate than get like a $50K check.
No, here's why I disagree. There was a poll on Build Back Better in West Virginia of likely voters. And it wasn't just the majority of Democrats and the majority of independents. It was even a majority of Republicans that liked the original Build Back Better proposal. And so that was the case, and Manchin stuck his middle finger up because he had another thing he could do to garner support, which was a little bit of a bait and switch and a culture war trick. He was able to posture like, I'm against the leadership in the Democratic Party because I'm a good old West Virginia Democrat and I'm more moderate. So as long as he takes that line and doesn't get into the specifics of what he's actually against, then he could still have a political win, even though he's doing something that's deeply unpopular when you get into the specifics of it. You see what I'm saying? It's too easy. With the media that doesn't educate people enough about what really is going on, it's too easy for him to mislead people into thinking like, I'm the iconoclast maverick who's doing the right thing, when if you look at the specifics of what he's doing, it's actually deeply disliked according to the numbers.
Joe Manchin has a direct financial interest in maintaining the energy policy that we have right now. I mean, direct, like status quo equals Joe Manchin makes more money. And do I think that impacts what he does? 100%. Now, what I will say that is, gets the point of, well, why is it now that none of these big things can happen anymore when, it was pretty corrupt back in LBJ's day as well. And I do think that part of that is culture war and the fact that because you've had this neoliberal market-driven consensus now for 40 years, which has been on both sides of the aisle, there isn't any sort of belief that the government can actually deliver for you in a meaningful way. And so instead of like people being in the streets for Medicare for all during a pandemic, instead, they're much more focused on these sort of like culture war signaling fights because they don't think either of these parties is going to deliver for them. They're right. And so instead they're like, well, at least I can like show my support for the one that doesn't have contempt for me and who I am, that I feel like is on the right side of these sort of like cultural signaling debates that ultimately are very low stakes in terms of the day-to-day life.
Go ahead. Let me just say, though, I think it is more corrupt today because it's institutionally corrupt today. So there were a number of Supreme Court decisions that started in the 1970s, and a number of cases related to that continue up till today. The most recent ones are like Citizens United and McCutcheon. But I'm talking going all the way back to like Buckley versus Vallejo and First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. These are the original cases in the 1970s that basically started to legalize money as speech. And so you're allowing for legalized bribery and huge campaign contributions from corporations and from billionaires. And it's as a direct result of that's why we are where we are today. Yeah, it was corrupt back in the day, of course, with LBJ. I mean, politics has always been corrupt. I'm sure you've seen the movie Lincoln, where the way he had to go about,
the central plot line.
Yeah. So, like, it's always been corrupt, but now it's institutionally corrupt, where, like, in order to even win in D.C., it's like you have to take money from all these different lobbyists and all these different industries, and then you're first and foremost representing them. Whereas back in the day, at least with the Democrats for an extended period of time, there was a time when they didn't take corporate money. I mean, that was what Bill Clinton and the DLC was all about, is like, now we're going to be more like Republicans, we're going to take the corporate money. Well, there was a time when they only took like union money and teacher money and lawyer money.
It's hard to challenge corporate power. It's hard to change the economic status quo. Those things are difficult. It's easy as hell to get on Twitter and, send out some like, on the left, some super like woke identitarian thing that ultimately is signaling that I'm a good person, but I'm not actually going to do anything about like the issues that I claim to care about. And on the right, to jump in on like the don't say gay bill or whatever.
Stop the
like
steal.
Those things are easy to do. It's easy to kneel in kente cloth. It's a lot harder to like actually unionize Amazon workers and make sure that Black lives actually matter in this country. And so the fact that politicians have been rewarded for those cheap and easy culture war displays, well, then that's where the incentives lie. And like I said, I don't think that's a fault of the American people. I think they're right to be skeptical that any of the material projects that they might be interested in, that they might feel really benefit their families, are very unlikely to come to pass. And, this past year with the complete crumbling and dissolution of Build Back Better is as good an example as that's ever been.
Yeah, I'll square the circle and I'll say I think it's corruption, and I do think it's also just lack of political consensus overall. And the reason why Joe Manchin gets reelected is because at the end of the day,
Political consensus among who?
well, amongst frankly the people who vote, and I think that's the other problem, which is that per what you're saying, 100. I mean,
But I don't see. But like $15 minimum wage, there's a huge political consensus. There's a huge political consensus for the prescription drug. I mean, there are plenty. The stock ban, like there are issues that have a mass political consensus.
A lot of them,
and it just doesn't matter.
But then they don't vote on that, unfortunately. Like
Consensus
the people
is
who
but they do
vote-
when they're asked to directly vote on the issue as such. Like remember,
Right.
Trump won the state of Florida, but
Yeah, and
60% of the
minimum wage.
Florida voters voted for the minimum wage.
I totally agree with you. What I was just saying is that from what I've seen with Trump, like, and this is what really broke a lot of the way I look at politics, is you can get 10 million more votes and just piss off libs. And that's a sad but powerful lesson, which is if you're an aspiring Republican politician or a Joe Manchin, like, what do you learn from that? Which is that I can literally win re-election and not do anything.
Right.
Like, that's kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
The sideshow is powerful.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're 100%
Yeah.
correct, and that's easy to do.
Yeah.
The material politics do move voters. I mean, the people who lost the child tax credit, they were in favor of Democrats in the midterms, and now they're in favor of Republicans.
Yes.
They shifted
Or
more
they're not voting.
dramatically or not voting than any other group. So it's not that material politics don't influence people or that they don't vote on it. It's that the other stuff is so easy that that's all where all the incentives are for politicians.
Sorry,
The
I-
sideshow is strong. I'll agree with
Sorry,
you.
I know you're
Saagar.
trying to move us on, but I just want to say a quick
Yeah.
thing off of what Krystal said, because I think what we're really getting at here at a meta level is just like a deep dearth of political talent. Because what you are describing, Krystal, is the ability to say, hey, it's like the cookie, it's like the marshmallow test, right?
Yeah.
Hey, like there's this like super obvious thing.
Right.
But if I wait a second or I think a little deeper, there's this deeper thing. There's
Yes.
this amorphous, and that's what political greatness is, right? Like,
Yeah.
like for example, LBJ, we'll turn this into LBJ. He could have just rested on, hey, I'm Kennedy's guy,
Right.
and I just won the biggest presidential election in American history. I am going to chill. The thing that makes him great, despite Vietnam, despite all the mistakes towards the end, was really his belief that there is this great society, and I'm going to, like, that is what greatness is. And I do
He had
not
a
see that.
vision.
Yes.
He had this reminds me of the conversation we had at State of the Union.
Yeah.
He had a vision, and he used whatever was handed to him to make that vision reality. And a great president right now has every crisis at his disposal to use to galvanize the American people behind a true transformational program. But that's not who Joe Biden is. And frankly, it's not what he has ever been. And it's not really what he was elected to be.
100%. And, you talked about Lincoln. It was the same thing. The central premise of that movie was Lincoln was like, no, I need to pass the 13th Amendment right now because I foresee all of these political pitfalls in the future. And so I'm going to use this, lame duck Congress in order to pass one of the most transformative amendments in American history. LBJ is an example. Great political talent from let's say what today rhymes the most with is probably the Gilded Age and the age of acrimony post-Civil War.
Yeah.
Well, politics then sucked. Like, remember Rutherford B. Hayes? Not really.
We don't.
Most people don't.
It's like on a literal
You,
level.
I am a Rutherford B. Hayes fan.
Grover
He's got the
Cleveland.
posters in his room. It's
It's
adorable.
like, Grover Cleveland is super cool, right? Like, nobody talks about these people for a reason. And it was because at that time we agreed on nothing. We actually got almost nothing done. Calvin Coolidge and all of that was, kind of the median center of how people thought about politics. Or sorry, not Calvin Coolidge, Hayes and those politicians. But then what happened is that a political genius, Theodore Roosevelt, comes in and rescues America from the Gilded Age by creating and transforming an entire new era with the progressive era, bringing in this type of energy and change and shock to the system, which changes everything forever. And that is actually what we're missing more than anything. So I'll move us on to the next one, which everybody requested here, which is energy policy. And this is actually fits very neatly like a glove into this entire conversation. So I'm reading here from a tweet from Heather Long. We've discussed this on the show. Crude oil prices right now have fallen in the past month, but the average gas price is still above $4 a gallon. Why? Gas stations actually make the most of their profits when oil prices fall. I'm not going to sit here and demonize family-owned gas prices because this is a broader, bigger structural issue. The issue is that right now we have no political talent or thinking as to the long-term problem of how do we drop the actual gas price, and then beyond that, how do we make sure we're never in this situation again? What's fascinating is that the current drop in price has nothing to do with Joe Biden. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve and all that, as we predicted at the time, was going to have extraordinarily limited amount of impact on the long-term effect of oil. The reason why oil prices are down is because of the Chinese lockdown. Guess what you can't bank on for energy policy? China's going to remain locked down forever, which is going to drop our price. So we have no current strategic thinking in the White House as to, and look, we've talked a lot on the show, Krystal, about nuclear energy. I'm basically a nuclear maximalist, but there's no discussion of this from a national policy perspective. By the way, I actually even checked. Tim Scott, the state of South Carolina, gets a huge amount of their power from nuclear. There's actually pro-nuclear Republicans who are out there. I'm not saying they're not cringe in many other ways. However, there's no political talent in the White House beyond taking months to arrive at, oh, let's tap the SPR. I'm like, oh, what a genius move. You know, it's like that's what you should have been doing a year ago. They should be taking the current cringe rhetoric around Putin's price hike, take it away from, household goods inflation, and focus something purely and have a real national debate in terms of both on gas, in terms of long-term energy, and in terms of also pointing out the fossil fuel companies who are raking in profits right now. Go ahead, Kyle.
So we're the number one producer in the world of oil and gas. Do I have that right?
Yes.
The number one producer. The issue is we outsource most of it.
Yeah, we ship not vast majority, about half to the global market. And this is the other problem with oil, which is oil is truly global, is set by global supply and demand.
Part of why the movement towards electric is important, because the concept of energy independence kind of doesn't really make any sense when you have a global market.
Yeah, right.
Electricity is something that has to be generated here, and then we can deal with what are the sources of that electricity.
So let me just say, given that fact, why not nationalize it? I mean, there are a lot of other nations that have oil that's nationalized, and they have the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Norway, for example, right? I mean, the whole country's like phenomenally wealthy, and the standard of living is so high, and it's like, it's so weird that we have oil that's under the ground on our public land, but then a private corporation gets to come in and buy up the rights for pennies on the dollar and be like, well, now this is ours, and then they make a colossal amount of profit on it.
And it's even
why
worse than that,
why should we allow that?
Because not only do they do that, then they capture our political system, and we end up with Joe Manchin and all the many more bought-off politicians like him driving policy instead of what is actually in the national interest. I mean, this is Matt Brunig's argument, and let's put aside the political realities and whether there's consensus around this, because we all know that this is not really on the table.
Correct.
But if you're just blue skying, what would be the best solution? You have this situation where in the short term, you actually want to ramp up production to deal with these price spikes. And in the long term, medium to long term, you want to ramp down production. So sure, could you come up with some elaborate system of tax credits and incentives that basically amount to more giveaways to oil? Yeah, you could do that. Or you could directly manage it, because this is now a market that we don't want to just be subject to market forces and gas company executives doing what they think is going to be most profitable, because we have competing priorities. In fact, their incentives are exactly the opposite. Right now, because they got burned during COVID, they don't want to invest in producing more. So it's not a problem with pipelines and permits and all this other stuff. It's actually the gas companies don't want to produce more right now because they got burned during COVID and they don't want to invest the resources. And of course, over the long term, they will do anything possible to kill what might be, price efficient and sensible renewable solutions to include, the entire array of renewables, including nuclear. So the most elegant solution, sometimes the simplest solution is the best. Like if people are poor, give them money. That's UBI, right? If people are homeless, give them housing. That's kind of what it is with the oil companies. The most elegant solution is just to nationalize and manage it directly.
What do you think, Marshall?
The thing that's hard for me is I know absolutely nothing about energy policy, so I won't. And Krystal not cheated, but took my political consensus take off the table. She preempted. So
Wait, what did I do?
You were
You're
just
like, it's not going to happen. So let's
you're right. You can't say that one.
I mean, it's true. It's not going to happen. It's still the answer.
I'm quasi left without a escape route. So I'll just take a different tact and basically just say, here's what I'm actually frustrated by. What I'm actually frustrated by is what have we known since basically 2015, 2016? Brexit, Trump, COVID, Putin's war in Ukraine, all these different bits. Crazy events are going to happen out of nowhere. And I feel like we are so reactive.
Yes.
So my reluctance around the nationalizing the oil company debate, not knowing anything about the topic, it's not even about the practicality. It's not about like the socialism, like whatever. It's more just we are doing this in response to this short-term event. And I don't know what that fits into what a long-term vision of what American society should look like. So for example, with the supply chain issue, the way I think about it is or supply chains and then housing, I'll do both. So one, supply chains. Saagar, you want to buy something for your kid for Christmas? It will show up. Like that is the society that I want to live in. With housing, we all agree on this from different perspectives, but like, hey, like if you I don't even say if you have a job, but basically if you are a young person, you do not have to think it's crazy that you could get a house someday. Like those are what visions we want to have. I don't see a similar vision for energy. And if it turns out that a nationalization strategy could further whatever vision that is, I could have that conversation, but that's just what I'm lacking.
Let me tell you what the vision was.
Yeah.
The vision was the Green New Deal. I mean, that is not only I don't know what the polling is now because it's been so demonized.
Yeah, and they messed up the rollout of it.
And they messed up the rollout and they made
Excluded
it
nuclear.
easily
And it was a grab bag of just every left-wing
But
idea. It's not the original idea.
The big concept of like, this is a national project we're all going to engage in. The concept of we're not going to leave coal miners behind. We're not going to say, learn to code, good luck, right? We're going to have a holistic transformation of our economy that moves us away from what is not only bad for the planet, but is a disaster for our national security. That framework is actually a good framework. That is what we should be doing. It's just, the left, failed on some of the specifics.
Oh.
It gets completely demonized by everybody across the board. And so now if you propose anything that even looks like it, you're considered, foolish and ridiculous and absurd and all the rest. But the reality is, this is, even if you don't give a shit about the planet, I think everybody should be very clear that this is a massive national security issue for us right now. And the fact that we're like, oh, we care about human rights, so we're not going to have Russian oil, we're going to have Saudi oil, is completely, silly and absurd.
When I think of a Green New Deal, intuitively, I think probably the same thing that you think, which is like, let's do this gigantic nationally mobilizing project where I love the idea of making the U.S. infrastructure number one in the world and by a mile. Like, I don't just want to update it. I don't want to just want to, improve it a little bit. I want to have the number one infrastructure that's the envy of the world. So I think about that, and I think about transitioning to green and renewable technology, definitely open to nuclear. I'm not sure if the technology is there yet, but thorium is supposed to be like nuclear but meltdown proof.
And, there's also little mini reactors now, which are even cooler.
See, there's a million things we can do and should do down that path, but I'm sorry, the progressives screwed it up to the high heavens because the bill didn't even end up being what I just described. The bill ended up being, let's just put every single left-wing policy into it and call it the Green New Deal, and it was ripe for attack. Now, I would defend almost every individual piece of the Green New Deal on its own merits, but you can't just put it all together and say this is the Green New Deal when the original idea wasn't supposed to be that at all. So I'm actually really frustrated with the Democrats on this because you had an idea that was a good idea that was polling at like 80 plus something percent, and then you shot yourself in the foot and made it easy for idiots like Sean Hannity to go out on his show every night and destroy it.
Let me also throw this into the mix because Gallup just did some polling on support for climate change policies, and I've even seen, even in West Virginia, which is like caricatured as, oh, they just want to stay on coal forever. Like even in West Virginia, that's not at all the case. They want to have jobs, yeah, sure, but listen, anybody whose family members have worked in a coal mine is not dying for their kids to also work in a coal mine. I can assure you of that. So on, these basic measures, providing tax credits to Americans who install clean energy systems like solar power in their home, 89% favor. providing tax incentives to business to promote their use of wind, solar, nuclear, 75%, setting higher fuel efficiency standards, 71%, establishing strict limits on the release of methane in the production of natural gas, 62%, providing tax credits to individuals who buy electric vehicles, 61%, and spending federal money to increase the number of electric vehicle charging stations in the U.S., 59%. If you poll overall on some of the, top proposals to move us towards renewable energy and away from fossil fuel, it's very popular, even in states that would be, where they have significant jobs dependent on the current status quo. So this again comes down to an issue of corruption and capture of Washington, because the politicians are not at all responsive to that sort of polling. What they're ultimately responsible to is, the fossil fuel industry. And that's why it's not just that their incentives are misaligned with what we actually want to see and do energy policy in the short term and the long term. It's that their capture of the political system makes it impossible to move in a better direction.
Go ahead, Marshall.
A quick, this question for the two of you, super curious for your answer, because there's a point of tension here between the Green New Deal vision point, which is very well taken, and where this started, which was the price of gas is too high. Because you're right to, in the context of this conversation, say, let's put aside people who climate change. But that's actually part of the issue, right? And if you talk to people who are in climate policy, scientists, et cetera, a big issue, once again, right-wing listeners, go away for a second. A big issue is actually gas probably should be more expensive, because part of the way that we transition to a clean energy future is that we focus away from those sorts of policies. So I'm just curious about the contradiction between Green New Deal's image of a world where we're using just less gas in general.
I think the gas should be more expensive view is sort of very libertarian. It's like we're going to force people.
We'll free market our way out of
We're
this.
We're going to force people through their suffering to get off of gas and drive less. That's not the only direction that you have to go in. I mean, an alternative example, which is very simple and something that Biden has talked about, but of course they haven't really done, is making the price of electric vehicles a lot more affordable. And then, by the way, when you reduce consumption of gas prices go down. And so it makes it easier for working class people who are still dependent on, fossil fuel driven vehicles to be able to survive and get to work and do the things that they need to do.
Quick thing, Krystal, what you're really saying is that I am so captured by neoliberalism that even
yeah.
in my attempt to be a lefty climate splainer, I actually was just, but the market, Krystal. Yeah, I've imbibed.
I'll say this, though. That's an important thing, and that gets to a real dynamic. Whenever I hear the grassroots Republican response to Green New Deal, it's like they want to make it more expensive for me to drive. That's the number one.
Right.
They want to increase my energy bill. And this is where I would just
they want to make it so I can't eat meat.
Right.
That's the other.
Yeah.
And there are legitimate strains of that. I don't want to downplay it. There's some restaurant, the best restaurant here in New York, which apparently doesn't serve meat anymore. But more what I'm pointing to is that cost is still king for the majority of consumers.
Yes.
So this is where you can't let idiocracy get in the way of it. So we're here in New York City. I've talked about this before on the show, but they closed by Cuomo, at the pressure of environmental activists, closes the Indian Point nuclear power plant, which was supplying a decent amount of power here to the city. And now Con Ed is doing natural gas-fired plants. And by the way, because of the whole Russia thing, it's also more expensive for consumers. So consumers got screwed. And I'm not blaming... Look, I will blame the blinders of the environmental activists, but what I'm pointing to is that one of the key points from this is that through federal government subsidy, let's be honest, we already subsidize these fossil fuel companies dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
One of the problems that we have right now is that we don't have technology neutral tax credits. So right now, a lot of the tax credits that go for renewable energy go towards solar and wind. I'm not saying solar and wind are bad, but from a capacity perspective, they don't compete at all whenever it comes to nuclear. So let's just make it technology neutral, obviously exclude fossil fuel, make it so that you have to hit a certain carbon threshold, which is below natural gas, and let's see who wins. And these are the types of things where maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I think you could probably pass that in some form. The problem that we have right now is that, to Marshall's point, the dirty secret is that a lot of people, neo-lib kind of climate people, will basically say, yeah, you have to make it more expensive.
By the way, this isn't just neo-libs.
Okay.
even a lot of lefty climate.
Right,
Like,
right.
There's a this
Behind
is a weird
closed doors, they're
convergence.
like, no, we need to make gas more expensive for people so that they are forced to buy electrical.
No,
And like, I just reject that 100%. Yeah.
But my point, and your point as well, in nationalizing it, is that you nationalize the industry so that you can do the things that make sense with it. And one of the things I would do is make sure gas prices in the interim, until we get on renewable technology, make sure it's cheap and affordable for working people. So now there may be some who
Who are
disagree with
the
me on
most
that.
likely to drive, right?
Right.
Like,
So
and
there
have to
may
drive
be-
long
Which
distances.
connects to our housing
There- Yeah,
conversation too.
There
by the
may
way.
be people who disagree with me on that, but I don't even think it's that many, to be honest. I think most lefties who
Well, let me say also there is a split, kind of a generational divide in the environmental movement, which I can't say that I'm deeply steeped in, but I have enough of the understanding of the contours of it, which is, originally the environmentalist movement, when it was Earth Day and all this, climate was one of the things that was just starting to come to the surface as a major issue. And there was more of just a sort of anti-development stance in general. The younger generation, Sunrise and the Green New Deal type of folks, well, first of all, they're laser focused on climate as the number one issue over and above all else. And so they're much more into like building, right? So, the opposition of the activists in New York was basically like, we don't want to build stuff, anything, because we're just generally anti-development. Whereas in fact, if you're going to transition to a different energy source, you're gonna have to build a lot of stuff. You're gonna need a whole new infrastructure, to your point, to be able to support that. So there's also this kind of like ideological and generational divide within the environmental movement. And I think the younger generations have a much better sort of grasp of what would actually be required. And also, by the way, I think are better on the issue you're talking about, Marshall, because what I really found appealing about the Green New Deal to start with is the fact that central to it is we are not leaving people behind. In the social democracies that people like Kyle and I love to hold up as great examples, they do have a different orientation towards these things where they're not obsessed with the jobs, they're obsessed with the workers. Mm-hmm. The workers are central. And so if an industry is damaging to the country, damaging to the world, they're okay with it going away because their commitment is to the workers, and they know they have a safety net and program in place to make sure those workers are going to be okay. And I think that's the way we need to think about things more in America, rather than holding on to like, oh my God, but if we have single payer, then the health insurance ghouls are not going to have a job. No, if you have a commitment to the working people and you make sure that they're going to be okay, then you can phase out industries that are damaging to the population overall.
Let me just say real quick, just to rewind for a second on the nuclear point. So I always viewed myself as relatively agnostic on the issue of nuclear energy. And I guess in modern times, maybe I'm leaning slightly more towards okay. All the other options seem to be worse, but you have to acknowledge there is sort of a PR problem for nuclear because when people think
the
of
only
nuclear,
problem is PR, and this is why I get pissed off.
No, but it is also a real
that's
problem.
like
You have
Okay,
hold on,
how many people died from Fukushima?
But
How
hold
many
on,
people-
you have 3 Mile Island, you have Fukushima, you have Chernobyl.
3 Mile Island didn't kill anybody, by the way.
What have we heard about Chernobyl in the past few weeks, Kyle? What's going on?
I didn't.
Okay, even
How is that
Chernobyl.
relevant?
Okay, we don't live in the Soviet
Okay,
Union.
but-
We don't have
but-
RBMK
hold on.
reactors.
There-
But no. A problem with nuclear, and this is a widely understood problem with nuclear, is that one of the big issues with it is political instability and incompetence. And I'm not naive enough to think that this thing that we're doing right now in the United States is definitely on solid ground and going to last a really long time. For all we know, this thing could crumble apart within just a couple of decades. So all I'm saying is that's a big asterisk on let's do nuclear power. You need to have a very high level of competence and you need to have political stability. And right now, the world is definitely lacking in political stability. That's not to say that the other things are better, because they're not. But it is to say there are issues there.
I hear your point. Natural gas is still worse. Natural gas also has instability in its markets, releases 50-something% more carbon. And if you look at this on the industrial scale, more people have died from smog, pollution, other chemical accidents. And look, am I saying that it's not scary? Yeah, it's scary.
Understood,
okay?
but I'm saying it's a false dichotomy that we should be like thorium. Like I said before, if they could get the technology on thorium enough to the point where we could do these thorium facilities, then I'm all in.
Listen, you've persuaded me on nuclear, but there is also an issue with cost where
it costs a lot.
Yeah, there have been massive cost overruns. Now I understand because we talked to lovely, what's her name?
Meredith Angwin, nuclear grandma.
I think made some she was lovely, and she made some great points about how because when you're creating a one-off, like if you build just one car,
Right.
it's going to cost millions of dollars. If you're doing this routinely and you have a process and you have economies of scale, then it could be more reasonable from a cost perspective. But that is also another legitimate nuclear concern.
Totally legitimate.
Yes.
I would just say that, yeah, it might be cheaper to build low capacity power like wind and all that, but then you still have to have natural gas in order to back it up. So
Right.
Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.